Today we're going to discuss the current state of education for Black students, as well as strategies to create meaningful and authentic parent engagement in light of the COVID pandemic and distance learning. In this session, the goal is to give parents, teachers, and administrators the tools they need to start collaborating. But first, let's take a look at Black education and distance learning. So about 70% of Black households with school-age children said they support or strongly support keeping all instruction online, according to a recent poll, whereas only about 32% of white parents indicated the same. This is primarily because of all the pre-existing social inequities that influence health outcomes, like food insecurity, affordable housing, and access to health care. Black Americans are more likely to have pre-existing health challenges such as diabetes and hypertension, and that puts them at risk for more COVID complications. We're seeing that despite a lot of community support, job loss has really impacted the African American community more than others. We also need to think about how the Black community has already been encountering health and economic problems outside of this existing pandemic. So a lot of these challenges really require us to take a look at some of the systems to ensure that students have access to mental health specialists. Another issue that has been elevated is the digital divide, and it's really only exacerbated since we've been dealing with COVID and really widens that achievement gap. We've talked about for years that African American students are underserved in terms of technology. And now we really have to start to question, are they getting that adequate education that they have a right to, because technology is an issue. And we still have the issue of Black students experiencing persistent educational disparities when it comes to disciplinary practices, even within distance learning. In fact, you may have heard about recently an incident where a Black student had the police called and he was subsequently suspended because they saw a toy gun in his home from his Zoom class session. So again, we're really looking at the disparities that existed for Black students while we were having in-person instruction, really being elevated during the time of COVID. So at this point, parent engagement is probably more critical than ever when we're talking about schools. So let's take a look at what family involvement really is and how important it is. So research demonstrates that parent and family involvement really contributes to improved outcomes for students, and that definitely is true for African American students. So everyone, whether it's students, parents, teachers, administrators, really our entire community, everyone benefits from family involvement. So what are some of the benefits of family involvement and engagement in school? Well, there are more positive attitudes towards school, and that's just not for students, that's for parents as well. There's higher achievement, better attendance, and homework gets done consistently because it's a lot easier when mom and dad are engaged and they're asking, I know you have homework, because they have a good relationship and connection with their teacher. We also see higher graduation rates and enrollment in post-secondary education. And really, the schools become better communities for students to be in. They become better schools to attend. So let's take a look at some of the research on family and parent involvement. And this is where we really make the distinction between how we engage all parents versus how we might engage our Black parents. So parent and family involvement differs between different ethnic and cultural groups. What works for one demographic does not work for another demographic. So it's really important that these school programs be individualized to fit the needs of the students, the parents, and the community. And this is where data is really important. So in education, we have lots of data, lots of numbers. So this is where schools really need to do a deep dive into the data and really differentiate data based on demographics. And so when you're able to have a very effective individualized program, you're really going to see more opportunity for student achievement And that's when the families, the schools, and different community organizations work together. It's truly a collaborative effort. So now we've talked a little bit about why it's important to engage. We know it's important. Data proves that we see better outcomes for students when parents are involved and engaged. But if it was that easy, we probably wouldn't be having this seminar right now. So let's talk about some of the reasons that parents give for why they don't participate. So why don't you take a moment, take a quick 30 seconds and think about why parents may not participate, or if you're a parent, think about why you don't participate. So what are some barriers to involvement? So here are some examples. The school doesn't really support involvement. And that's everything from how are parents greeted when they walk into the office, how are parents communicated to, is it only phone calls when something is wrong? Are schools making an effort to proactively engage with parents? On the flip side, are parents only calling when there's a problem? So we're really need to look at how can we create more proactive opportunities to engage with our school. Another challenge might be school practices that do not accommodate diversity. You really need to look at what does our school look like? And are our practices reflective of our community? And that even includes, do our staff look like our community? Are our teachers looking like our community? Those are important issues. People want to go where they feel comfortable, where they feel like I belong. So if your school isn't showing diversity, it could be a barrier for parents. This is something, childcare constraints, which applies to lots of parents. But we need to think about, when are we having these meetings? If we're asking parents to come in the evening, are we providing childcare for them? Or are we asking them to leave their families behind to come and participate in something? And then lastly, we have to realize that people come in with previous negative experiences about schools. Unfortunately, a lot of the challenges with schools and the Black community, it's been generational. So it's not unusual that a parent may have had negative experience with the school based on race, and that the grandparent may have, and that the great-grandparent may have. So if people are coming in with some negative experiences from the past, it's going to impact their willingness to engage with the school. Now, we can't go back and change people's negative experiences, but we can take that into account when we frame programs on how we want parents to engage. So some additional barriers to involvement. Cultural differences. You have to understand that cultural differences are not necessarily a negative thing. I always encourage people to stop saying, I don't see color. I want you to see my color. As an African American woman, I want you to see my color and understand that it shaped who I am as a person. What I ask, though, is that you not treat me differently or unfairly because of my cultural differences. We also need to look at, and especially in the time of COVID, just a lot of struggles that families are having meeting some of their basic needs. We talked about a little earlier how the community is more impacted due to food insecurity, housing, loss of jobs. So when we're asking parents to get engaged and they're dealing with how do I meet the basic needs of my family, that's a barrier to involvement. Another one is feelings of inadequacy. A parent who maybe they did not have a lot of education, or they just feel like this person is so smart, these teachers, the administrators, they're so much smarter than I am, and they feel inadequate. And I think it's really the role of the school to make parents feel empowered, regardless of what their education level is. I tell parents all the time that you have a PhD. You have a PhD in your child, and that's valuable, and no one else has that but you. And so as schools, we need to appreciate that. And as parents, we need to understand that we have every right to be advocates for our parents, or for our students, I should say. Safety is an issue, not even so much physical safety, but emotional safety. Do these parents feel safe coming and being involved? Do they feel welcomed? They may be uncertain about what they can do and what they can offer, and that's why we need to look at what is engagement. Is it just coming and staffing a table at a bake sale? What are different things that we can ask our parents to do? We need to look at the strengths that each parent offers and give them an opportunity to participate. And then lack of time. We're all very busy. I think that we come under the wrong assumption that because we're all at home, we have all this time on our hands. And honestly, I think I'm busier now than I was pre-COVID. Just because we're here at home does not mean that we aren't busy. So the reality is when we're looking at parent engagement, whether it is pre-COVID, in the midst of COVID, post-COVID, it's really critical that administrators and teachers consider how economic issues have impacted African American students and their families. We don't leave these issues outside the classroom door. We don't leave these issues at home. It impacts students and families as they engage in school. So when we look at parent engagement, we can't look at it from the lens of, well, I don't have any of these issues. I'm not having any problems, therefore they shouldn't have any problems, which is easy to do. It's easy to look at things from our own lens. But as teachers, administrators, and parents, we have to start looking at things through other lenses as well, because that's a key component of collaboration. So I think we really need to rethink what family engagement means during school closures. So typically when we talk about parent engagement, family engagement, it always involves the family coming to the school. Come to back to school night, come to the school site council meeting, come to the PTA. It's always parents coming to the school site. Well, now that's not possible. So we need to look at what are other opportunities for family engagement while we're doing distance learning. So we need to start breaking down some assumptions we may have. So the first assumption, caregivers are home with their children and can help direct distance learning activities. They are available to answer questions, help with assignments, and navigate technology issues. So while we would think that is something that everyone should be able to do, again, we have to look at it from the lens of the challenges that African American families are facing. Not that other families are not facing these issues, but when we look at the data, there is a higher number of Black families who are negatively impacted by COVID. So again, we need to look at it from that lens. So when we're talking to our teachers, they may be designing lessons that are very well intentioned to be engaged and to have kids be involved. But the fact is, not all caregivers are home with their children during distance learning time. They may be taken care of by older children, or what we're seeing now is grandparents are jumping in and taking care of kids while parents are still going outside of the home to work. So I don't know about you, but I just recently had to help my mom set up her email. And trust me, technology is not her strong suit. So I couldn't imagine the challenges that she might face helping a younger child doing distance learning. But doing this also creates an opportunity for engagement between parents and teachers. So you can increase opportunities for family engagement really just by being flexible. This is a point in time where we all need to be flexible with everyone and understand As parents are trying to adjust to this new world that we're living in, and as teachers are trying to adjust to teaching this way, we have to give each other some grace. And that's critically important because this is a time where we're all going through a shared experience. We're all going through this at different levels, but we all have this shared experience. So let's look at the second assumption. Caregivers understand your expectations and know how to motivate students to complete assignments. Again, if you've talked to any parent, distance learning is pretty challenging. Whether it's the technological side, whether it's struggling with getting kids to focus, it's really a challenge, and lots of families are at a loss on how to manage the work that's coming home, let alone trying to convince the students to complete their assignments. And so this is an opportunity for parents and educators to start streamlining communication by giving clear expectations of what is needed from the teacher. So educators, be very clear about what you want. Streamline your communication with these parents. They're getting bombarded with a lot of messages every day. And parents, if you're unclear, you've got to ask. You've got to advocate for your child. And we can't be afraid as parents to say, I don't know that this is working for my child, or I don't understand what you're asking. We can't sit back and feel like we can't advocate for our students, because we have to. It's critical now. And then the last one is families expect teachers to assign a full day's worth of work. And that's hit or miss. I've had some people say that they don't expect teachers to give kids a full day of synchronous work where they're sitting in front of the computer. But again, this is another opportunity for teachers and parents to communicate and engage at a very basic, simple level, because then you start to develop a relationship, a collaboration with the parent and the teacher, and that will extend to the greater school community. Also, we need to understand that during this crisis, for parents, their primary focus is making sure that their child's basic needs are met. So educators need to recognize that family can prioritize their children's education, but also still be worried about keeping their jobs, having financial security, having health care. That is a priority over did they finish this assignment. And that's completely understandable. But we cannot assign blame to parents and say, well, they just don't care about education, because then you're losing an opportunity to engage with that parent. I think there are opportunities to connect, and instead of expecting parents or caregivers to become a teacher, I think teachers can collaborate and complement a lot of the family engagement by partnering with parents to address and recognize children's social and emotional needs. At the end of the day, we are all human. We are all challenged with what's going on right now. So take an opportunity to engage parents on just a very basic, connected human level. Just take a moment and ask your families, how are you? How can we work together? Parents, make that phone call, send that email. How can I help you? How can I work with you to ensure that my student is doing the best that they can do right now? So we're all sitting on a computer right now, watching a presentation. We are probably all very familiar with Zoom or WebEx or Google Meet or Hangouts, just all these different things. And so again, we need to shift what we feel is participation and engagement. Are you having your parent committee meetings online? Parents, are you asking your schools to say, we need to have our African American Parent Advisory meeting online? We need to meet. This is a time where you as parents probably more than ever need to connect with other parents, just for a sense of understanding that someone is going through what I'm going through right now. Shared experiences, share best practices. This is how I get my kid to sit down and do his homework, or this is how our family schedule works. So taking advantage of some of these virtual meetings are important. If your school is not offering them, you need to ask. That's another way to be engaged. And honestly, in some instances, you may see more parent participation when you do these virtual meetings versus when you'd have the meetings at the school site. And that has a lot to do with time. So again, are we offering different times for these meetings? Typically, again, pre-COVID, I would always recommend that schools have a meeting in the morning and a meeting in the evening. And that way parents who, whether they work a standard 8 to 5 or they have a different work schedule, they have that opportunity. We have to not just make meetings convenient for the school staff. It has to be convenient for everyone. So again, I highly recommend if your schools are not offering virtual parent meetings, you need to ask them about that and you need to have them begin to offer those. So parents, these are some things that you can ask your schools to do, your districts to do. And for those that are teachers or administrators in districts, we really want to look at some key elements where parents and schools can collaborate still, even though we can't physically be in the same space. So I notice a lot of school districts are doing this. They've really done a great job about updating their websites, being extremely engaged in social media, whether there are apps that they use. So that should be up front and center on their district webpage. Numbers and links where parents can contact them for assistance. I've been seeing where some schools, the minute you go to their website, there's a pop-up that comes up immediately with sort of their contact us or their COVID 101 or whatever the latest information is. So those should be things that are sort of an automatic. And again, if you're not seeing that with your school district, you should be asking them to do that. Make and receive phone calls. This is for everyone. So teachers, make the phone calls. I know emails are easier. Everyone doesn't like making a phone call. I am guilty of that myself. But make the phone call, send a text. And on the flip side of that, parents, pick up the phone when the teachers call, return the text. I have worked in classrooms and I have many times called the parent, texted the parent, emailed the parent, sent the parent a letter, sent out smoke signals. I mean, please get back to your teachers. It's critically important. This is a collaboration and it can't be one-sided. So just as much as you want to receive the phone call, make the phone call, and that's on both ends. And it's nice sometimes just to talk to someone versus an email. Another thing is recognize that assigning the work is different from learning. And this is a key area where parents and schools can really collaborate. You know, parents, every week or however often the teacher sends the assignments, talk about how your student is able to get the real lesson out of that. And if they're struggling, talk to the teacher about it. Just having the assignment is not learning. And so sometimes you need to make that next step. How is my child learning and how are they connecting to this material? Next is parent involvement really must be a legitimate element of education. And it's got to be meaningful, strategic, and authentic, which means you can't just ask parents to participate because you have to check a box that says we needed parent participation. You can't have a meeting just because you want to put out your message on your terms and it's a one-way stream of information, because parents will not react well to that. It's got to be a collaboration. It's got to be a discussion. And especially when we're dealing with Black parents who oftentimes, and rightfully so, feel isolated from the school system. And the only time that there's outreach is if the school needs something. Where we're having an LCAP meeting and we have to have X amount of parents so we can say that we follow the state's guidelines, so let's invite them. It has to be authentic. It has to be meaningful. When it comes to some of our African American parent groups and some of the meetings specifically for that, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to meetings and all we get is we get bombarded with all the negative data. Here's the achievement gap. Here's how they're behind. Here's why suspension rates are high. You got to come better than that. You need to come with some strategies about how we're going to change that. And you can do that by getting the parents involved and listening to them. But it's got to be authentic. You can't just invite them just to say that they were in the room. So here are some truths about parent involvement. You know, parent involvement is really a process. It's not just a bunch of meetings. We have our parent African American advisory meeting once a month. That's parent involvement. It isn't. It needs to be a very strategic process on how we are going to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. We want to reduce the achievement gap. We want to lessen suspensions. We want to increase graduation rates. We want to increase students who complete A through G. We want to increase the number of students that apply and get accepted to college. It has to be very specific and targeted. You know, parent involvement involves a vision, a policy, and a framework. If your district isn't putting together a real vision and policy for African American student achievement, you need to ask for it. You need to demand it, because you're not going to move the needle on a series of meetings where we don't have a vision, a policy, or a framework to do these things. Also, parents, your interaction with your kids are really the cornerstone of involvement, and that has nothing to do with being in the school or attending a school meeting. How your children see your feelings about school is going to impact how they do in school. So it's really understanding how your children feel about school. You will be able to pick up how they're feeling. If there are things that are going, not great in school, your connection with your kids are really going to tell you that. And then, as we highlighted earlier, most of the barriers to parent involvement are really found within school practices. And a lot of that may not even be directed to parent engagement. So how many of our schools say that, kids can't wear hoods on their head? But we're not looking at culturally, maybe that little black girl in the class has her hood covering her head because she needs to have her braids redone. Or because she's in the midst of having her hair done and it didn't get finished. These are cultural things that we need to look at. And if our practices within the schools are punitive to African American students, it's going to be very difficult to get parents to engage in a positive way. So a really important issue is to realize that not all Black parents are alike. Black people are not a monolith by any means. And I think sometimes we think that we kind of, we'll just do these types of things. And typically they're stereotypical sort of things that they think they need to do to engage Black parents. Black parents have different levels of education, of income, their beliefs, sexual orientations, life experiences. And I put up here, this was a few years ago, where Samuel L. Jackson was doing an interview on Channel 5. So if you watch Channel 5, you probably recognize Sam Rubin, has been their entertainment reporter for years. And he was interviewing Samuel L. Jackson and made a comment about a commercial that Lawrence Fishburne was in. So I pulled the quote where Samuel L. Jackson said, "I am not Lawrence Fishburne. We don't all look alike. We may be Black and famous, but we don't look alike." And it's really the same thing we're dealing with Black parents. Black parents are different. Again, you can't say what applies to one group applies to another. So really think about the uniqueness within the Black community. Yes, there are shared experiences, but there are also different areas where you may need to think about, for African American students who perhaps are doing well and achieving, am I talking to all Black parents as if there is a challenge or an issue or a problem? So again, we need to look at the data and frame our communication to all types of Black parents. So here's some key things to remember as we begin to wrap things up. Family members are equal partners in a child's education. And it's something that parents need to remember, but also that schools need to remember. Parents, you are so powerful, and you are an advocate for your child. And if no one else is going to fight for your kid, if you don't do it, who will? We need to look at the home as the primary educational environment. And now in distance learning, it literally is the primary educational environment. Schools need to respect the diversity of the families and their varied needs. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about how distance learning really specifically impacts African American families because of how COVID impacts African American families. Understand that families care about their children. There have been many times where I've been in meetings where people are trying to plan, how do we get Black parents more involved? And they feel like they don't care. And the data proves that not to be true. African American families really do care about their children's education. Family involvement is important through all years of a child's education. We typically tend to see parents very engaged when the kids are young, and then when they hit middle school, that engagement and that involvement tends to lessen and lessen. And I feel like that's when you need to really ramp it up, because you need to prepare your child for life post graduation. So our school leaders and staff, they need support and training on how to encourage family involvement. And that training needs to be culturally aware and culturally sensitive. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all when we talk about school and family partnerships. We need to understand the challenges and the uniqueness of the African American community and look at that when we're creating these partnerships and programs. Change is going to take time. We're looking at generational issues between the African American community and schools. This has been years and years and years in the making. So it's going to take a while to fix. But when we know that, then I think it creates less stress when we're trying to do an instant turnaround. If any school says we're going to put this program in a year and everything's going to change, that's not realistic. It just isn't. This is going to take time. Family involvement takes many forms and may not require a family's presence at school. Again, we know now that no family is going to be present at school. So how do you engage families and parents? How do you make sure you stay connected to the school? The benefit of you being involved is a direct impact on your child, a direct positive impact on your child. So we have to figure out how we can remain engaged for the benefit of our kids. So I want to show you a couple of examples of what works. Now this is pre-pandemic, but this is just to give you an idea of some things that worked and things that may be able even to transition into a virtual world. So Moreno Valley Unified really has an amazing program for African American parents for engagement. They do Black History celebrations. They have parent ambassadors, which is actually a paid position. I believe they do a stipend for parents where they get parents that reflect the community, and they have them go to the schools and interact with parents. They also have a program called Junior Black Achievers. Again, getting our kids ready for life past high school and starting at the middle school age. The process of beginning to do well in school and getting ready for graduation in college begins early. They also have something called the Unity Conference, where it's basically let's get excited and ready to go for the new school year. And they talk about various issues, again, that are specific to African American students and their families. And this picture here is from one of their Unity conferences. But again, it's a very proactive type of thing. It's not, we're going to call you because we need something from you. This is them giving back giving to parents and saying, this is how we're going to help you and your students achieve throughout the school year. So they have some really, really great programs and examples. I really lift them up as probably one of the best districts in the Inland Empire when it comes to engaging Black parents. Also, Rialto Unified, they have their district African American Advisory Council where they will meet monthly. They have events that have speakers. For instance, this one, they had Barrington Irving, which I don't know if you are aware of him, but he's an amazing pilot and he has an amazing story in a field where you don't see a lot of African Americans. So they had him come out. They have dinner. So these are some examples of things that you can utilize. Having Black History events, again, that talks about, are we creating a comfortable environment? Are we being culturally diverse? Are we focusing on our entire school and all of our demographics? I would also recommend, if you have an African American Parent Advisory, create a Facebook page. Give parents updates. That's really, really important. We need to find ways to connect with parents, and social media seems to be the way to go. Everybody's on social media. So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today. My information is here on the screen. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. If you need resources, I'm happy to provide those to you. And I hope that everyone stays safe and healthy and has a great school year.